The Dalek Time Controller was a high-ranking, temporally sensitive Dalek, who operated as a critical part of the Dalek hierarchy in the pre-Time War era. Its exact origins are shrouded in mystery, with some sources suggesting that it originated from the far future, perhaps even as part of the new Dalek paradigm. But despite this, its main operations took place at a point in time before the Time War. The Time Controller initially posed as a completely different rank, calling itself the Dalek Litigator. It worked with the new Dalek paradigm to take control of the 400 Sunlight worlds, but was stopped by the 11th Doctor. Interestingly, at this point in its history, the Time Controller outranked the Supreme Dalek, a point which will become relevant later. Still maintaining its guise as the Dalek Litigator, the Time Controller travelled back along the Dalek timeline and oversaw the trial of the Master, sentencing him to death, but later learning that the Master had survived as a death worm morphant and claimed a new body. The Time Controller, acting on the orders of the Dalek Parliament, followed the Master to Earth in 2223 and was assigned to a Supreme Dalek leading a new Dalek invasion in that year. The Supreme had no idea what the so-called Dalek Litigator's intentions were, and was frustrated at its arrogance. Using duplicates, the Time Controller hired Vienna Salvatore to assassinate the Master, but later decided that she should bring the Master alive. Once captured, the Master was able to enslave the Supreme Dalek to his mental control, and tried to do the same to the Time Controller, but it escaped using an emergency temporal shift. It is at this point that the Time Controller seems to sever its association with the new Dalek paradigm in the far future, and instead becomes more involved in the Dalek hierarchy native to the point in the Dalek timeline that it had travelled back to. With critical knowledge of the future, and an elevated understanding of the interlinked and often fragile nature of the web of time, the Time Controller was able to influence Dalek operations to avoid unnecessary damage to the timelines, or use the timelines to the Daleks' advantage. The Time Controller's first chronological meeting with the Doctor, from his point of view, occurred during its mission to the Amethyst Viral Containment Station. The Time Controller led a detachment of Daleks to the station in order to track an escaped test subject, Myla, who they had infected with a virus and planned to use the wealth of the viruses stored on the station to aid the Dalek cause. The Time Controller led its patrols against the Virans and eventually took control of the station. However, the 6th Doctor and Charlotte Pollard interfered with its plans and caused a cataclysmic explosion aboard the station and abandoned the Daleks who were desperately attempting to contain it. The viruses were subsequently scattered throughout time and space, and the Virans pledged to retrieve them all. The Doctor believed that the Time Controller had been destroyed in the explosion, but it was instead cast adrift in the time vortex. Eventually, the Time Controller arrived in the 2180s and linked up with the Daleks of that era. The Time Controller had been damaged during its journey, but the Daleks of this era had no knowledge on how to fix him, so they recruited the Monk, who as a Time Lord had knowledge of temporal science. The Time Controller took control of Dalek operations and launched a second Dalek invasion of Earth, one that was arguably even more brutal than the previous one 2 decades before. Terrible plagues were unleashed on Earth, and the population suffered horrendously under the Daleks, until eventually the Time Controller's plans were undone when the 8th Doctor, Susan, Lucy Miller and the Doctor's great-grandson Alex worked against the Daleks. Though Alex was killed, Lucy was able to sacrifice herself by piloting a Dalek saucer into the Time Controller's base of operations, once again displacing the Time Controller in time and ending the Dalek occupation of Earth. The Time Controller was saved from the vortex by a Time Lord calling himself Cotris, who wanted to alter his own biodata to remove his Time Lord heritage, and then subsequently eradicate the Time Lords from the universe using retrogenitor particles, which could travel down the timeline of an individual and undo their existence, as well as the existence of anyone who shares their DNA. The Time Controller and Cotris incubated retrogenitor particles in Molly O'Sullivan, a nurse from the First World War and later companion of the 8th Doctor, by interfering with her life, travelling along her timeline and ensuring that she would be the perfect weapon to use against the Doctor and, by extension, the Time Lords. However, the scheme was set back considerably when Cotris himself was erased from existence, though the Time Controller was still aware of him thanks to its nature as a time-sensitive being, and swore to uphold their plan to destroy the Time Lords. Initially, the Time Controller went about this in the usual Dalek way, conquering a planet to build a Dalek superweapon before eventually being stopped by the Doctor. However, in this instance, the 8th Doctor asked for the Time Controller's help to defeat a new threat, one that was potentially just as dangerous to humanity and the timelines as the Daleks themselves: the Eminence. The Eminence was a mysterious force that existed as a gaseous entity and a psychic force that the Doctor had encountered on several occasions, but at this point in history was beginning a huge offensive against the rest of the universe. Able to transform its victims into zombie-like soldiers called Infinite Warriors, the Eminence was at war with humanity and several other species for many years, and was a clear threat to the Daleks. The Time Controller agreed and used its weapon to destroy the approaching Eminence fleet. At this point in its history, however, something significant occurred to the Time Controller that altered its destiny forever, or sealed its fate, depending on how you look at it. Due to its interference in the Dalek timeline, its existence outside linear time as a result of several temporal alterations, and its recent infection with retrogenitor particles, the Time Controller was banished from the Dalek Empire, as the Daleks no longer recognised it as part of their timeline. In response, the Time Controller struck up an alliance with an old enemy, the Master, now in a reborn body, who helped the Time Controller set up temporary headquarters in Montmartre, Paris in 1921. There, it attempted to create a new generation of Dalek time strategists to aid its cause. By creating a Dalek duplicate using human DNA called Adelaide du Temps, the Time Controller was able to lure in and capture the most creative minds in the area at that time, artists and criminals primarily, which it then transformed into Daleks. It also worked on creating a replacement for its casing, which at this point was battered and ragged after years of constant conflict. Despite interference from the Eighth Doctor, the Time Controller was able to create new Daleks and capture the Eighth Doctor's companion Liv Chenka, from whom it learned much about the Eminence War. The Time Controller and the Master then travelled back in time even further and created an alternate timeline by conquering Earth, changing human history and transforming the planet into an apocalyptic industrial wasteland. Now named New Skaro, the planet was populated by the enslaved remnants of the human race, those who had not been exterminated or converted into Daleks. Sontarans also populated the planet, as the Daleks had conquered their homeworld and discovered the secrets of their cloning techniques to create new slave workers and grow raw materials to make new Daleks. Although the Time Controller and the Master ruled together, each secretly planned to betray the other, a fact which Liv Chenka soon found out. The Doctor later arrived in Moscow, though he had crash-landed and was suffering from severe amnesia due to the alterations to the timeline. The Time Controller ordered that the Doctor be brought to him, as he intended to dispose of the Master and use the Doctor for the remaining aspects of its plan that required Time Lord knowledge. However, the Master betrayed the Time Controller and revealed that the majority of the Daleks created on the planet under his supervision were secretly programmed to obey him. A civil war began on the planet between the Master's Daleks and the Time Controller's strategists, which was later intensified when the Doctor reprogrammed the Sontaran cloning vats to create newborns with enhanced strength and a pre-programmed hatred of Daleks, which soon toppled their regime. The Time Controller captured the Doctor's companions, Liv Chenka and Molly O'Sullivan, and stole the Doctor's TARDIS to make its retreat. In a stunning temporal twist, the Time Controller used its knowledge of the Eminence and its own time-travelling capabilities to interfere with the origins of the Eminence and, in essence, become the Eminence itself, transferring its consciousness into the gas. However, the Daleks arrived, having been led there by the Doctor, and were able to destroy the Time Controller, banishing the Eminence to the far future where it was destined to be destroyed. The Daleks departed, but not before recovering the remains of Adelaide du Temps, whose Dalek DNA had come from the Time Controller. Under the Dalek Supreme's orders, her remains were reconstituted into a new Dalek time strategist, who would go on to serve the Dalek Empire as a replacement for the Time Controller during the Time War. Due to the Time Controller's convoluted history and crisscrossing timeline, the Time Lords would later come to view it as an apocryphal myth. Indeed, the Time Controller's story is perhaps one of the most complicated and bizarre of any Dalek. Created in the far future, possibly by the New Dalek paradigm, only to spend the majority of its existence in the Dalek's past, meddling with time to create a second Dalek invasion of Earth, meddling with retrogenitor particles, and meddling in the Eminence War to the extent that it is eventually excised from the Dalek timeline and goes on to create an entire alternate timeline before eventually becoming the Eminence itself and being banished to the far future to be destroyed. It doesn't help that this Dalek history is out of order whichever way you look at it. Its constant time travelling meant that the critical points in its history are scattered across the centuries, and its encounters with the Doctor occur out of order and across several different alternate timelines. However, what makes this Dalek truly unique is its personality. Unlike its brethren, the Time Controller speaks in a softer, more melodic voice, and due to its ability to rationalise the Doctor's position in the timeline, it is often more interested in establishing conversation and acquiring information than outright trying to exterminate the Doctor and his companions. This Dalek is capable of seeing the bigger picture and think outside the box in order to stay 2 steps ahead and ensure Dalek victory in the long run. Some of this Dalek's most significant moments are simply times in which it converses with the Doctor or his companions, such as its conversation with the Doctor in Montmartre as it reveals its plan, or its later encounter with Liv Chenka in which it reveals its mutant's singular eye has turned completely dark with retrogenitor particles. There are even times in which this Dalek works with its enemies against the Daleks for its own survival, such as when it agrees to help the Doctor fight the Eminence, or when it and Livchenka escape a Dalek facility together after it was expelled from the Dalek Empire. Ultimately, the Time Controller is a fantastic individual Dalek character, who originated as a time-sensitive Dalek set on ensuring Dalek victory across time and space, but later became a separate entity entirely, who was hell-bent on establishing its own faction and ensuring that it was the supreme being in the universe, even going so far as to abandon its Dalek body entirely and become the Eminence. Although its position would later be filled by the Time Strategist in time for the Time War, the Dalek Time Controller's impact on Dalek history is nonetheless significant, and despite being later dismissed as simply a myth by the Time Lords, the Time Controller remains one of the most significant Dalek units in the history of the species.
Inflict your revenge this Christmas on the new remote-controlled Dalek. Yeah, they've got the lot, the flashing lights, electronic banter, and the idle threats. And they're all useless when it comes to climbing the stairs.
Dalek section leaders were low-ranking Dalek commanders who were given command over Dalek operations on particular worlds, such as mining operations, scientific research missions, or small-scale tactical exercises. These Dalek commanders were usually Dalek drones who were given slightly more authority than their peers, meaning they usually donned an identical casing design to the Daleks under their command. They were classified as Dalek leaders, but were not powerful or influential enough to have their own unique casing designs. Some Red Daleks did take the role of Dalek section leader if the operation in question was large or important enough, but generally speaking, section leaders were simple grey Daleks. One particularly notable section leader was initially in command of the Dalek Scientific Research Station on Spiridon, and was tasked with overseeing the Dalek invisibility experiments, subjugating the local population, maintaining the facilities on the planet that kept the Dalek army stored there in suspended animation, and exterminating any resistance from invading Thals. In order to carry out this final task, the section leader ordered the creation of a bacteria bomb that would wipe out all life on the planet. But this plan was derailed when a rebel Spiridon worker realised what the Daleks were planning to do, and sacrificed himself to ensure that the bacteria could not be released without also destroying the Daleks. The Dalek section leader took regular reports from his subordinates and realised that the Thal force that was hiding in the jungle was being led by the Doctor, and gave the order that he should be captured for interrogation. The Doctor was captured by the Daleks, but later escaped with help from the Thals. When the Dalek Supreme arrived on Spiridon, he ordered his aides to take complete control over operations on the planet, berated the section leader for his incompetence, and promptly executed him in the control room before swiftly moving on to the next phase of the Daleks' plan. The life of the Spiridon section leader summarises the status of the rank perfectly. Among standard Dalek drones, a section leader holds a position of authority, but to the members of the Dalek Supreme Council, a section leader is utterly disposable, a stopgap subordinate whose function is to keep Dalek operations ticking over, and who can be brutally swept aside if the results are less than satisfactory. While spending time as a section leader is undoubtedly essential for an individual Dalek to eventually be promoted to a red Dalek, a blue Dalek, a gold Dalek, or a Supreme, it is also clearly a very dangerous rank for a Dalek to hold, as they are responsible, and therefore accountable, for both the successes and the failures of their subordinates.
Sorry.
The Exilon commander was a Dalek who led an expedition to the planet Exilon during the Third Dalek War, hoping to secure the Perinium ore that could be mined on the planet. A group of humans had previously landed on the planet with the hope of also securing Perinium, as a space plague had been ravaging the outer colonies of the galaxy, and Perinium was proven to be the only cure for it. Unknown to the humans, the Daleks had actually started the plague themselves as a form of biological warfare, and wanted the supplies of Perinium so that they could blackmail the galaxy into submission. Upon landing on Exilon, the Dalek leader and its forces disembarked their spaceship and confronted the humans, as well as the Third Doctor, before ordering their extermination. However, as a result of the power-draining ability of the great city of the Exilons, the Daleks found that their energy weapons were useless, and entered into a false alliance with the humans in the hope of using them to subjugate the local Exilon population, and find a means of disabling the power drain. Initially, the combined group of humans and Daleks, including the leader, were captured by the Exilons. However, the Dalek leader was able to negotiate an agreement with the Exilons, an exchange of knowledge in return for their assistance in mining the Perinium. This was yet another ruse, however, as in the meantime the remaining Dalek forces on their ship developed a replacement weaponry for their gunsticks, primitive projectile weapons, which were moderately effective at exterminating targets. With this advantage, the Daleks were effectively effectively able to enslave the Exilons, though not without suffering several casualties as a result of the Exilon city's defensive systems. The Dalek leader was able to exploit one of the humans, Dan Galloway, by feeding his ruthless nature and using him as a puppet, essentially, to facilitate their control over the Exilon workers. As soon as they had regained the upper hand, the Daleks betrayed their allies and treated them much the same way as the Exilons, causing Galloway to fight back against them, stowing away aboard their ship with a supply of explosives. Meanwhile, the Dalek leader and another of its subordinates entered the Exilon city in pursuit of the Third Doctor, and found themselves under attack by the inner mechanisms of the city, including an electrical trap and humanoid antibodies. While the Daleks were able to overcome the electrical trap easily, their weapons proved useless against the antibodies, who overpowered the Daleks and forced them to retreat. After its weapon was wrenched out of its gun box, the Dalek leader's subordinate made its escape while the leader provided covering fire. After escaping the city, the Dalek leader rendezvoused with its forces and secured a supply of perinium aboard their ship, planning on taking off and devastating the planet with a plague missile, which would kill the Exilons, the humans, and the Doctor simultaneously, while also making further human expeditions to the planet impossible. However, as it retreated into its craft and prepared the plague missile for launch, Galloway detonated the explosives, destroying the Dalek ship and killing the leader in the process. While its outer casing bore the same unusual silver and black coloration of its subordinates, the Dalek leader could be identified by its amber dome lights, and its conniving and manipulative personality made it a standout commander among the Dalek leaders of the Third Dalek War. Were it not for Galloway's betrayal, it is very likely that this leader would have been successful in destroying the Daleks' greatest enemy, and forcing the galaxy to surrender to the Dalek regime. Ironically, it was its own ruthlessness and dismissive attitude towards other life forms that ensured its downfall, and like most Dalek leaders, its arrogance ensured that it was not only destroyed along with its subordinates, but also that the Doctor and the humans were able to escape from the Daleks to fight another day. During their mission to retrieve their creator from the ruins of the Khaled bunker on Skaro, the Daleks dispatched a distinctive commander unit who donned armour with a darker shade of grey than his subordinates, who sported an unusually light shade of grey on their casings. This commander unit bared more of a resemblance to the early Grey Daleks created on Skaro by Davros, and appeared to be a veteran of older Dalek conflicts, commanding a ragtag task force during the Dalek-Mavellan War. Due to the fact that the war had taken a considerable toll on the Daleks at this point in their history, this Dalek and his soldiers appeared battered and ragged by the time they had found the location of Davros' body on Skaro. Despite being at a stalemate with the Mavellans in the war, these Daleks proved very capable against their enemies in combat, and had established a small base on their abandoned homeworld with many imprisoned slaves that they used for digging and clearing operations. This Dalek interrogated the captured Gallifrey and Romana, and oversaw the final phase of their plan to recover Davros. Once Davros was revived, this Dalek obeyed him without question, and threatened to exterminate all the prisoners they had captured unless the Doctor delivered Davros to them. In contrast to many Dalek leaders in subsequent campaigns, this Dalek showed great respect for Davros and accepted his strategies even if they differed from standard Dalek convention, undoubtedly as a result of the Daleks' long-standing stalemate with the Mavellans and their desire to look to new ways of thinking to help break the deadlock. Although the Dalek commander was successful in his mission to rescue Davros, he was destroyed by the Fourth Doctor, who broke into Dalek control, disrupted the commander's vision with a hat, and planted an explosive on the casing which blasted the Dalek commander apart. Before the Fourth Doctor's regeneration into the Fifth Doctor, this specific Dalek was recalled by the Doctor, and was the only Dalek of its era to be remembered in this way.
The year is 2000. The place, London. The invasion of the Daleks has begun. Their plan, to destroy all Earthmen.
The Renegade Dalek Supreme was a particularly notable Black Dalek who led the Renegade Dalek faction during the Civil War between the original Grey Daleks and the Imperial Daleks, a force of Daleks created by Davros who was cybernetically enhanced and programmed to be loyal only to him. Accounts differ on the exact origin of this Supreme Dalek. Some accounts claim that this Dalek was a Black Dalek who presided over Davros' trial, and survived the initial outbreak of the Dalek Civil War and came to rule over the Renegade Dalek faction as its highest ranking member, having previously held the rank of Dalek Supreme in the standard Dalek Empire. However, some other accounts suggest that this Dalek's personal history spans even further back than the start of the Dalek Civil War, and that perhaps this Dalek had played an important role in the preceding Dalek and Mavellan War, or even that this specific Dalek was in fact the original Black Dalek leader, aide to the Emperor Dalek, who oversaw some of the Dalek's earliest campaigns of conquest against the mechanoids, humans, and even the Doctor. Some sources suggest that the Black Dalek who oversaw the Dalek invasion of Earth, dispatched pursuer Daleks to exterminate the Doctor, and later led Dalek operations on Kemble in an attempt to use the Time Destructor to take over the Milky Way galaxy, went on to lead the renegade Daleks. But other sources indicate that this Dalek was destroyed when Davros and his Imperial Daleks took back Skaro, and that another Black Dalek took up the role of leadership over the remains of the Dalek Empire, which was subsequently labelled the Renegade Daleks, as Davros declared himself Emperor of the Daleks. Exactly which Black Dalek took up the role of Supreme Dalek is unclear. Assuming that the original Black Dalek leader died at the start of the Dalek Civil War, one particular Black Dalek who is considered to have taken command is the Black Dalek who initially rescued Davros from the human prison station near the end of the Dalek-Mavellan War. This particular Supreme was a veteran of Dalek campaigns against the Mavellans, and concocted a devious and intricate scheme to eradicate many of the Daleks' greatest enemies, the Mavellans, humanity, and even the Time Lords of Gallifrey, in a single grand scheme. In the aftermath of the devastating Dalek-Mavellan War, this Supreme Dalek hired humanoid mercenaries to fill the bulk of the Dalek army, created brainwashed duplicates to infiltrate enemy planets, and planned to rescue Davros from his imprisonment in a human space station in order to use his genius to defeat the Mavellans, all while spreading brainwashed duplicates onto Earth and Gallifrey to ensure Dalek conquest of the universe. The Supreme Dalek worked closely with Lytton, commander of the Legion of Mercenaries that the Daleks used as troopers to bolster their ranks. The two often bickered over strategy, but the Supreme Dalek did show some degree of respect for Lytton's efficiency in combat tactics. Although the Supreme Dalek's plans to duplicate the Doctor and his companions and infiltrate Earth using a time corridor both succeeded, it was ironically Davros who proved to be the greatest hindrance to Dalek efforts. Davros turned several Daleks against the Supreme, and allowed the release of the Mavellan virus on the station, which the Doctor later took advantage of in order to destroy the Daleks on Earth. Although the Supreme Dalek's plans had been disrupted, he was confident that his duplicates on Earth would complete their mission and cause the downfall of human society, though this as yet remains to be seen. In its attempt to wipe out all of the Daleks' enemies in one swift stroke, the Black Dalek had unwittingly intensified many of the Daleks' most serious problems. Their creator was now loose and actively plotting against them, the Mavellan virus had depleted their already weakened forces, and the increasing factionalism within the Dalek race was accelerated. Both the Supreme Dalek and Davros were thought to have been killed in the destruction of the prison station, but Davros was later revealed to have survived, and the Supreme transmitted to the Doctor from allegedly a secret location, goading the Dalek's greatest enemy before retreating. When Davros established his Imperial faction and retook Skaro, this Dalek led the remaining Grey Daleks to Earth in order to capture a Time Lord device known as the Hand of Omega, which it intended to use to give his faction the ultimate advantage over the Imperial Daleks by giving them mastery over time travel. However, Davros had similar ideas, and planned on using the Hand to transform Skaro's son into a source of unlimited power for his Imperial Daleks. As such, both factions converged on Shoreditch in November 1963, where the Hand had been hidden by the Doctor. The Supreme Dalek, once again showing his pragmatism and devious nature, formed an alliance with a local fascist group and used them to find the Hand of Omega, while kidnapping a local child to use as the basis for a Dalek battle computer, using human imagination to fuel its battle planning capabilities at the cost of making it more susceptible to emotions. The Renegade Daleks and Imperial Daleks battled on the streets of Shoreditch for possession of the Hand of Omega, and the battle-hardened veterans of the Renegade faction initially appeared to have the upper hand. The Supreme Dalek's ploy worked, as its human slaves recovered the Hand of Omega and were promptly exterminated. However, the Imperial Daleks deployed their greatest advantage, the Special Weapons Dalek, a heavily armoured Dalek designed to destroy other Daleks. This powerful soldier allowed the Imperials to push back the Renegades and assault their base, capturing the Hand of Omega and wiping out the Renegade soldiers, leaving the Supreme as the only survivor. However, the entire incident had been part of a grand scheme by the 7th Doctor to destroy the Daleks. The Hand of Omega backfired on Davros, destroying Skaro and wiping out the Imperial Daleks, leaving the Supreme Dalek as the last surviving Dalek in this time zone. Isolated, alone, and weakened by its connection to a human child, the Supreme Dalek was manipulated into destroying itself by the 7th Doctor, who successfully convinced it that it no longer had a purpose now that its entire species had been supposedly wiped out. Screaming in rage and confusion, the Black Dalek died, ending the Dalek Civil War once and for all as both participating factions were eradicated. Despite its failure to reunify the Dalek race, the Black Dalek of the Dalek Civil War was still considered to be one of the most prominent Black Daleks in Dalek history, alongside the original Black Dalek leader and Dalek Sec of the Cult of Skaro. Many sources suggest that the original Black Dalek leader and the Renegade Dalek Supreme are in fact one and the same, though the various contradictory sources make this difficult to determine with certainty. During the Time War, the Time Lords looked back along Dalek history and identified the various Black Dalek Supremes as different individuals, though they were known for placing undue importance on the specific differences in Dalek casing design, and they were unable to perceive the potential ongoing rivalry between this Black Dalek and the Doctor, which seemed to persist across their their many meetings. Following the Dalek Civil War, the coveted second-in-command position to the Dalek Emperor was taken by the Dalek Time Controller, who also had an ongoing rivalry with the Doctor throughout several of his incarnations. However, regardless of whether he was the original Black Dalek leader or just a Mavellan War veteran with delusions of grandeur, the impact that the renegade Dalek Supreme had on Dalek history cannot be understated.
Room for two?
Affirmative.
Our time travel suite is available. How long will you be staying?
Until last Tuesday.
Lovely.
When orchestrating the conquest of alien worlds, the Imperial Dalek faction, in contrast to its counterpart, the Renegade Dalek faction, were known for relying more on infiltration operations than direct assaults, perhaps as a result of their Emperor Davros having a more subtle approach to combat strategy than the incumbent Supreme Daleks that led the Renegades. Throughout their appearances in TV stories, novels, and Big Finish audio dramas, the Imperial Daleks are characterised by their clandestine operations, and only resort to direct assaults when no other options are available to them. From their creation in the secret catacombs of the Tranquil Repose facility on Necros, to their attempt to hijack the Battle of Waterloo and corrupt Earth's history, to their sinister infiltration of Coal Hill School in 1963 during their search for the Hand of Omega, Imperial Daleks are essentially the sneaky Daleks, while Renegade Daleks rely more on direct confrontation. This is seen in Revelation of the Daleks when they invade Necros to capture Davros, in the Juggernauts when they attack the colony on Lethe to destroy Davros' new experiments, and of course in Remembrance of the Daleks, in which the Renegades launch a full-scale attack on Coal Hill School and deploy their forces to occupy Shoreditch. According to the Seventh Doctor, the Imperial Daleks were known for conducting operations with limited numbers, usually just a single Dalek, which is referred to as an operator. The most prominent example of one of these operators that we have seen on screen is the operator in charge of the Coal Hill School operation, which usually kept itself hidden in the basement of the school, protecting a transmat unit that it could use to summon reinforcements, and used insidious Dalek technology to enslave the headmaster of the school, Harvey Parson, by installing a device behind his ear that forced him to obey Dalek commands. Using Parson, the Imperial Dalek operator was able to secretly search for the Hand of Omega without rousing suspicion. Upon arriving in Shoreditch, the Seventh Doctor immediately suspected that there was something awry going on at the school, and he and Ace entered the school to find out what was going on. The Doctor encountered Parson, who initially thought that the Doctor was there to apply for the caretaker job, and seemed set to refuse the Doctor's request to be allowed to look around. However, the operator ordered Parson to allow the Doctor access, hoping that his curiosity would lead him down into the basement and into the Dalek's grasp. This is exactly what occurred. The Doctor and Ace went down into the basement and accidentally triggered the Dalek transmat, summoning another Imperial Dalek to the school. However, the Doctor was able to rewire the transmat to create a malfunction with the Dalek teleportation technology, destroying the Dalek. He explained to Ace that the Daleks would be able to eventually fix the transmat, as there was likely an operator nearby who had been placed there for this exact purpose, realising only at that moment that there was another Dalek in the room. Screaming its battle cry, the operator emerged from the shadows, and the Doctor and Ace attempted to flee up the stairs. Ace got out, but was intercepted by Parson, who knocked her out and locked the Doctor in. The operator effortlessly glided up the stairs, relishing its victory, but Ace quickly came to, incapacitated Parson, and helped the Doctor flee. The operator blasted the door off its hinges, but by then the Doctor and Ace had gone. The operator and Parson prioritised repairing the transmat, while Ace and the Doctor fled to a nearby military vehicle, intent on securing heavy weapons to destroy the transmat for good. Armed with an anti-tank rocket launcher, Ace and the Doctor re-entered the school, and the Dalek operator rounded the corner, screaming like a banshee and firing its weapon wildly as the Doctor and Ace ducked under a table. Thinking quickly, Ace armed the anti-tank rocket, took aim at the Dalek's eyepiece and fired, obliterating the top section of the operator. Despite the heavy damage to its casing, the Doctor warned his allies to avoid it, suspecting that while the casing was heavily damaged, the mutant creature inside may not be dormant yet. Although the operator was destroyed, Parson was still under Dalek control, and he managed to repair the transmat to allow other Imperial Daleks to arrive at the school, before later being killed by his Dalek masters when he failed in his task to extract information from the renegade Dalek agent, Mike Smith. Although the transmat was later destroyed permanently, the Imperial Daleks simply defaulted to their backup plan, a direct assault with a Dalek shuttlecraft packed with Imperial Daleks and a special weapons Dalek. The rest, as they say, is history. The Dalek Time Strategist was a significant asset to the Dalek war effort during the last Great Time War, as its time-sensitive nature, coupled with its specifically engineered knack for strategy, gave it the ability to strategize temporal conflicts as well as any Time Lord. It served as the second-in-command to the Dalek Emperor during the Time War, and replaced the previous time-sensitive Dalek in the Empire, the Dalek Time Controller. In the period of Dalek history leading up to the Time War, the Time Controller, which had previously served as the Dalek Empire's de facto temporal advisor, defected from the Empire to establish its own faction during the Eminence War, and eventually went on to become the Eminence itself before being banished to the end of the universe. As part of its scheme, the Time Controller created a Dalek duplicate from its own DNA, which it later transformed into a Dalek Time Strategist, part of a new generation of Daleks that were grown by the Time Controller to conduct temporal conflicts. After the Time Controller's destruction, the Dalek Empire recovered this specific Time Strategist unit, which went on to take the Time Controller's place. The Time Strategist quickly rose to prominence during the Time War, as just 2 months in it was already advising the Emperor on critical Time Lord operations, including one named Project Revenant, which the Time Lords used to resurrect many of their fallen leaders, including Rassilon himself, to help fight the Daleks. Although Dalek Supremes were initially considered second-in-command to the Emperor in the Time War, eventually the Time Strategist itself rose to that position, and it often came into conflict with the Time Lord Celestial Intervention Agency. The Time Strategist's significance to the Dalek war effort was never more prominent than the various occasions in which it had to deal with the fallout of attempts by various parties to wipe the Daleks from history altogether, as on several occasions it was left as either the singular remnant or the most significant figurehead of a small collection of remnants of the former Dalek Empire. During one instance, the War Master travelled down the Dalek timeline and averted their creation in an anti-Genesis, and the surviving Time Strategist recruited a version of the Master from a parallel universe to undo his counterpart's scheme. In another similar instance, the Daleks were erased from history, and the Time Strategist was forced to restore them by exploiting multi-dimensional temporal irregularities to find parallel universes in which Davros was still alive, and use him to restore the Daleks to the universe. The Time Strategist created an amalgamation of several different versions of Davros, and was eventually successful in resurrecting the Dalek Emperor and restoring the Daleks to the universe, with the added benefit of giving the Daleks access to various parallel universes in which inferior versions of Daleks existed, which they could use as frontline troops, dubbing them Skaro degradations, allowing the Daleks to have virtually limitless troops. Thanks to meddling from the 8th Doctor, his companion Bliss, and the Time Lord Tamazan, the Time Strategist scheme was disrupted, and their infinite reinforcements were halted. This was further complicated by the fact that the newly resurrected Davros had already come into conflict with the Dalek Emperor, which threatened to split the Dalek Empire. Like his predecessor, the Dalek Time Controller, the Dalek Time Strategist was able to see the Doctor's place in the Dalek timeline and acknowledge his significance to the future of the Daleks, even predicting his role in conflicts involving the Cult of Skaro, Dalek Khan, and the new Dalek paradigm, despite the fact that, from its point of view, these events were yet to occur. Using its temporal knowledge, the Time Strategist could also make use of temporal anomalies and other fundamentals of time travel science that were usually exclusive knowledge of the Time Lords to its advantage, and by extension the advantage of the Dalek Empire as a whole. This allowed it to sidestep several Time Lord plots and side effects of a temporal war, and it prioritised eradicating temporal weapons from enemy forces, not just the Time Lords but third-party factions affected by the Time War, such as the Helixtra and the Koskans. It also had critical knowledge of the Doctor's personal timeline, and was able to combat the War Valiard and use the Doctor's own deceased family members against him in several temporal gambits. The Time Strategist also tended to operate behind the front lines, and if it did need to take direct action, it would often lead a small elite squadron of Daleks rather than an entire army, just as its predecessor the Time Controller had done in the years before the Time War. Following the resurrection of the Emperor Dalek over Koska, the Time War began anew and eventually dragged on into a long and devastating conflict. At the direction of the Time Strategist, the Daleks were able to outmaneuver the Time Lords and gain the upper hand in the war, bringing the universe to the brink of destruction. The Time Strategist met many of Gallifrey's greatest leaders in battle across the war, such as Romana, Elistra, Tamazan, the resurrected Rassilon, the General, and of course the Doctor, who eventually regenerated into his war incarnation and formed a personal rivalry with the Time Strategist. And from the Time Lord's point of view, the Time Strategist became a legendary figure, almost as infamous as the Emperor itself. It almost succeeded in penetrating Castorgris's defences, which would have allowed the Daleks to attack Gallifrey itself, and was only stopped at the last minute when Romana's aide Narvin detonated a battle TARDIS to destroy its saucer, forcing the Time Strategist and the Emperor to flee as their saucer broke apart. The Strategist was also able to restore itself to life after being temporarily destroyed by Commodore Tamazan during an incident involving time-eradicated Daleks on Atheria. proving that it was dedicated to its cause and that it was extremely difficult to kill. The Time Strategist even became a legend among the Daleks themselves, and had few equals in the Empire. One contender, the Red Fleet Commander, was a clear rival to the Time Strategist and threatened its position of power, and so the Time Strategist took advantage of the fact that the Red Fleet Commander had negotiated in secret with the Thals, intending to lead them into a trap. The Time Strategist used this fact to implicate the Commander, tortured it for information regarding its plan, took the credit, and declared it a traitor before the Emperor, who praised the Time Strategist and secured its position as the clear second-in-command of the Empire. However, the Time Strategist did have some desire to claim the position of Dalek Emperor, and took advantage of a situation in which a renegade Time Lord called the Barber Surgeon was attempting to establish his own faction against the Daleks and the Time Lords during the Time War. The Time Strategist, in direct defiance of the orders of a local Dalek admiral, commanded several Dalek hunter-killers to follow the Doctor to the Barber Surgeon's headquarters, in the hope of using his plan to its own ends. When the Emperor learned of this, he dispatched a squadron of special weapons Daleks to destroy the Time Strategist for its attempt at subterfuge, but these events were undone when the Barber Surgeon erased himself from existence, restoring the Time Strategist to the Emperor's side once more. Near the end of the Time War, the Time Strategist began to gather Dalek superweapons, such as the Shadow Vortex, and capture crucial sources of Time Lord knowledge, targeting high-ranking Gallifreyans like Cardinal Illustra. During an attempt to capture Illustra, the Time Strategist was shockingly outmaneuvered by a Sontaran, General Fesk of the 8th Sontaran Battle Fleet, who had managed to capture a Time Lord Eternity Cage and use its Artron energy to fuel temporal weapons, which the Sontarans used to damage and capture the Time Strategist. Disarmed and imprisoned alongside Illustra, the Time Strategist discussed the Time War with her before being freed by a rescue attempt intended to save Illustra. After being recovered by the Daleks, the Time Strategist ordered the destruction of the Ravidian fleet and attempted to use the Eye of Harmony chamber of a captured battle TARDIS to destroy the Time Lords, but was stopped by the War Doctor. The Time Strategist would engineer several other schemes and gambits in an attempt to end the Time War, which was subsequently either derailed or subverted by the War Doctor. It seemed that as the war dragged on, the Time Strategist lost faith in the Daleks' ability to win the war by conventional means, and it instead became obsessed with acquiring new superweapons or advantages that it could use to eradicate the Time Lords in a single stroke, averting the war rather than winning it by conventional means. After suffering several defeats by the War Doctor, the Time Strategist seemed to disappear from the war altogether. Perhaps it, like the Doctor, eventually reached the conclusion that the only way to truly end the Time War would be to permanently eradicate the Daleks and Time Lords from existence, and this realization caused it to either go insane or defect, perhaps even escaping to another universe entirely. By the time the Daleks were eventually able to break through the Time Lord defences and reach Gallifrey, the Time Strategist was nowhere to be seen. If it was still part of the Dalek command structure during the last day of the Time War, however, it was likely destroyed when Gallifrey was cast into a pocket universe and the surrounding Dalek fleet obliterated itself with its own crossfire of planet-killing weapons. Although the ultimate fate of the Dalek Time Strategist is unknown, and the Time Lords would eventually consign the Time Strategist to the history books as a pseudo-mythological figure, its impact on the Dalek war effort during the Time War should not be underestimated. Thanks to the Time Strategist, the Daleks were able to keep up with the Time Lords' temporal knowledge, and use this knowledge to fight and win the various conflicts across the war. This Dalek was also unique among the other high-ranking Daleks of the Time War, as it shared its predecessor's temporal sensitivity and distinct personality, allowing it to take a more holistic view of Dalek history, which gave it a considerable advantage when strategizing for the Time War. Unlike other Daleks, the Time Strategist's voice often changed. Sometimes it had a deep electronic voice similar to that of a Supreme Dalek, and other times it had a higher pitched voice similar to the Time Controller. Some sources suggested that the Pathweb's information on the Time Strategist was itself considered unreliable, to the extent that it was disregarded by the new Dalek paradigm, as they had no way to verify it due to the Time Strategist's unique position as a temporally sensitive product of the Time War. However, several subsequent Daleks would go on to emulate aspects of the Time Strategist, or fill a similar role. Dalek Khan gained similar time-sensitive abilities when he attempted to travel back in time to the time-locked war to rescue Davros, though this process drove him insane. Interestingly, following his transformation into the Dalek Prophet, Khan spoke in a voice similar to that of the Time Controller and sometimes the Time Strategist, though with a more manic and sing-song intonation. The Time Strategist was actually aware of Dalek Khan's existence and dubbed him a false prophet during a conversation with the 8th Doctor. Several human historians also had a theory that the Dalek Eternal of the new Dalek paradigm played a similar role to the Dalek Time Strategist, serving as a temporal advisor who could see every possible future at once, and was actually out of sync with the rest of time after being directly linked to the Time Vortex. However, these rumours cannot be verified.
Save London from extermination! Doctor Who action figures
In the Doctor Who comic relief story The Curse of Fatal Death, a distinctive looking black Dalek with gold trimmings and orange dome lights commanded a squadron of Daleks in an alternate timeline in which the Ninth Doctor intended to settle down with his companion Emma and get married. The Doctor met his old enemy, the Master, on the planet Tercerus, and after a series of sewer-related mishaps caused the Master to age by hundreds of years, he brought in the Daleks to assist him in capturing the Doctor because, as he put it, only the Daleks don't have noses. Despite being the commander of this group of Daleks, the Black Dalek took a plungers-off approach to leadership, often allowing its subordinate unit to speak on its behalf. Interestingly, its subordinate unit appeared to have a personal familiarity with the Doctor, implying that they had met before. The Black Dalek joined its soldiers in pursuing the Doctor and eventually captured him and his fiancée after cornering them. The Black Dalek brought the Doctor, Emma and the TARDIS aboard their ship and tied them both to chairs. Why are there chairs on a Dalek ship anyway?
We will explain later.
As part of their alliance, the Daleks gave the Master access to their technology, a rejuvenated physical form,
And I notice breasts.
They're not breasts, okay? They're Dalek bumps.
Hey, that's me! I'm in the Curse of Fatal Death. And the boobs. But anyway, in return for their help, the Master grants the Daleks access to the secrets of the Zectronic energy beam, which, according to the Doctor, would allow the Daleks to conquer the entire universe within minutes. However, the Daleks secretly intended to betray the Master, and the Doctor subsequently made him aware of this by communicating with him using precise breaking of wind, the ancient and noble language of the Tercerans. In response, the Daleks attempted to exterminate the Master, but their firepower damaged the Zectronic beam controller, causing it to go into meltdown. Fearing an imminent simultaneous explosion and implosion of the Zectronic beam controller, the Master and the Daleks asked the Doctor for help. The Doctor, who was caught in the crossfire and regenerated into a new body, agreed, but after a bizarre series of accidents, the Doctor ended up regenerating several more times, eventually reaching their 13th incarnation. After saving the ship from destruction, the Doctor was allowed to leave by the Daleks, who astonishingly kept their promise. The Black Dalek even vowed to dedicate the Dalek race to peace in honour of their former enemy, who is now their saviour. Despite the fact that this entire event takes place in an alternate timeline, the significance of this particular Black Dalek should not be overlooked. It seems as though in this timeline the Time War never happened, perhaps as a result of the Daleks turning their back on their murderous ways. Out of the universe, speaking in terms of props and design, this Dalek is also significant. It isn't an original prop. According to Dalek 6388, it was built for a children's Royal Variety performance in 1994. Ironically, the original Black Dalek prop from Remembrance of the Daleks does appear in The Curse of Fatal Death, but it was repainted grey and black and plays the role of the hero drone, i.e. the grey Dalek that is seen most often in close-up shots. So it's this weird switcheroo situation going on, where the black renegade Dalek Supreme is playing a grey drone, and the role of Supreme is being played by a newer prop built in the style of the Imperial Daleks, but in a colour scheme reminiscent of the renegade Dalek Supreme.
You say that you think that disabled access is a Dalek conspiracy?
The action of the aliens has caused considerable disruption of operations on this planet. This was a matter beyond my control. Your orders were to exterminate them. It has not been possible. We have been unable to use the bacteria bomb. The responsibility was yours. You have failed. The Supreme Council does not accept failure.
What does hate look like, Amy?
Hate?
It looks like a Dalek. And I'm going to prove it.
Don't forget to click below to subscribe to
Dalek bumps.